Located in northwest Ontario, Flint Wilderness Resort plays host to some of the best walleye fishing in North America. A remote outpost camp located on Flint Lake is the setting for this week's episode of Fishing 411 TV. The Flint River connects Flint and Klotz Lakes, and for walleye fishermen, well, it's a watery highway to heaven. When the dust settles, Mark and Jake handle literally a boatload of impressive walleye, one hook set at a time.
Oh, there's fish. Well, you got one too, Jake?
Yeah.
That's the way to start a television show, a double header. Oh man, let's see if I can get mine in here. Oh man, it's beautiful fish here. Let me get my hands around this guy. There we go. Hey, welcome to Ontario, huh? That's the way to start a television show. 1, 2.
I think we are going to catch a pile of these on this episode, Dad. We're going to have our hands full. I'm looking forward to it, too.
The cool thing about Flint Wilderness Resort is it's very accessible. It's located right along Highway 11, so you can literally, it's a blacktop highway, you can drive right straight to the resort very easily. And more importantly, that means you can bring your own equipment. So you can bring your own boats, motors, electric motors, electronics, and you can have a very comfortable fishing experience when you come to Flint Wilderness Resort.
Look at that.
It was so cool. On the live sonar, I could look out in front of the boat. And there was about 5 or 6 of them there. Flipped over there.
That's not fair, Jake.
It's almost like cheating. Let's see what this
I don't remember you saying there's some fish over there, Dad.
Well, you know, I had to be sure, so I had to catch one first.
Well, I think you can be absolutely sure.
I'm sure now.
Let me get out of your shot.
That's so cool. You know, it's one of the things we hear in Ontario, and it's springtime. Today is actually Ontario's walleye opener. So we didn't have time to pre-fish for this show. I've never fished this body of water before in my life, and we're also going to be doing it without having any opportunity to pre-fish before the television show. So we're kind of learning as we go, but I have a feeling we are going to catch a ton of walleye like this one today. Well, that's a good one there, Dad.
Nice little Flint Lake walleye, although we're not really in Flint Lake at the moment. We're very close to Flint Lake. We're in a place called Flint Wilderness Resort. And we're getting a pretty good start here this morning. We've only been in the water a few minutes and found some fish that are going to be good eaters, so to speak, but hopefully we'll be able to find some better ones as well. Walleyes on a jig, opening day of walleye season, don't get much better than that.
We actually launched our boat at Flint Wilderness Resort, then we navigated all the way across a lake called Klotz Lake, and then to a river called the Flint River, which in turn leads into a lake called Flint Lake. And that's where we actually stayed. It was at an outpost on the north end of Flint Lake. Now the outpost is very rugged, not very fancy, but it's comfortable, and it's just the perfect digs for a place, a group of guys to hang out and spend a week fishing.
Special considerations are provided by the Lake St. Clair Walleye Association and by Striker Brands. Go early, go late, go prepared. Special considerations are provided by Fish Hawk Electronics. Fishing without a fish hawk is called boating.
That's really cool. You know, what we're dealing with here being that it's opening day, I'm just going to swing this fish in, Dad. He's hooked pretty good. Oh, maybe not. I thought he's hooked a little better than that. What we're dealing with, it's opening day in Ontario, is pretty cold water. In fact, the water temp's 41, 42 degrees. And I'm using a live sonar right now, which we've used a lot on Fishing 411, a lot of different brands. But I cast out there and I was watching my bait as it was coming back to the boat, and I could see a mark getting closer and closer and closer to the boat. Now I'm anchored with the electric motor, so I know that that fish was following it back to the boat, and eventually it got right basically below the boat, and I was just kind of jiggling real slow, and that fish bit right under the boat. But it just shows how important this live sonar is for this type of fishing, because honestly, if I didn't know that, I would have just reeled up, made another cast, and I would have never had an opportunity at that fish. So it's really cool to be able to see those fish, and then even see how lethargic they are on a day like today with this cold water, and how that fish slowly followed it back to the boat, and finally I enticed that fish in a bite.
And that feels good. You sort of like that feel of a tunk in the line, and the pieces of equipment that make this possible. We'll talk a lot about it today, but a low stretch line, you absolutely have to have either a fused line or a braided style line for doing this style of fishing. That fish bit an extreme distance of the cast, probably 100 foot over there when I felt that fish bite. If I was throwing monofilament or something like that, I never would feel that bite, never know that fish is there. And that's a good little fish. I'm gonna see if I can alley-oop him here. Probably gonna wish I hadn't. There he comes. But low stretch lines make all the difference in the world to be able to detect those bites. And like I said, that fish was at least 100 feet away when he bit, and I felt that bite just exactly like, literally, the jig was 2 inches away from the rod tip. Low stretch lines make all the difference in the world at catching walleyes, all the difference in the world. We're going to talk a little bit about the lure that I caught that fish on. I consider this to be two classics. The jig itself is something called an Eagle Eye jig. It's made by Eagle Claw, and I love this jig. It's got a beautiful, beautiful Pro V hook in it, just super needle sharp. And then the plastic is a Ripple Shad, and that's a Berkley product, and both of these products have been around a long time and caught literally boatloads of walleye. So if you're looking for a jig and a soft plastic combination you really can't go wrong with, man, that Eagle Eye jig is definitely at the top of my list, and man, I cannot tell you how many thousands of walleyes I've caught on Ripple Shads. This one happens to be a 3-inch. The 3-inch to a 4-inch size is going to be what you're going to find day in and day out is going to get you the most bites on river walleyes or walleyes in natural lakes.
Let's take a second and talk about the basic setup that I'm using to catch these fish. Now, no matter where you go across the country, if you're pitching a jig, this is kind of my go-to setup. I take it everywhere with me, and what I like is a 7-foot medium action rod. Now, one of the things is I feel like spending a little bit of money on your rod, and this type of presentation is important because the more money you spend, the more sensitive of a rod that you are buying. And when you take a jig and you cast it a long ways, it really is nice to have a nice sensitive rod where you can can feel those subtle bites from the walleye. So this is a Kage 7-foot medium action from Daiwa. It's a great rod. And I teamed that up with like a 200, 2500 size reel. Now, what I like is a little bit smaller reel because, again, I want a nice light package that I can make long casts, hold onto this rod all day, and it's comfortable. But then you have your rod, your reel, now you need to team it up with the line because all of these things are important, and a no-stretch braided line is very important. Now, one of the things that I like is a high-vis no stretch braided line. I like to be able to see that line when I make that long cast and you feel that fish bite. Sometimes you don't feel the bite, you just see the line twitch, and you can see that with that high vis line. So this package right here, I team it up at the very end with a fluorocarbon leader and a jig. It's just simply a fish catching system. If you come to Ontario, you're going to put this rod in your hand, you're going to catch a pile of fish.
Man, I love pitching jigs. It's one of the most enjoyable and purest of all kinds of fishing. And feel the bite, set the hook. Jakers might even have to break up that landing net.
Yeah, I think I'll grab the net for you on that one.
Yeah, we want to get this one in the bag. Love that look. Not a giant, but definitely a good representative fish for what a person wants to come to Ontario to catch. Let me get her out of there. Yeah. Love it. Bites it, and then of course that jig is completely gone. That's a beautiful thing because obviously he inhaled the entire jig. I felt the tick in the line, and at that point you just go into automatic mode and you swing that rod, you come tight on that fish, that first head shake. I mean, that's what walleye fishing is all about. That's why people come north year after year after year to get fish like this.
Special considerations provided by Abyss Battery. Power your pursuit. Special considerations are provided by the Ultimate Sport Show Tour, Michigan's premier sport shows.
Yeah, baby, look at that. Woo!
Travel Light Truck Campers presents the 411 on fishing.
You know, over the years I've owned a lot of fishing boats, about 40 different fishing boats, and every one of those fishing boats has had a gasoline kicker motor on it just like this one. But this kicker motor is different. This is the first time I've ever had an EFI Suzuki kicker motor. And the difference between the old school carbureted motors and EFI, you can't believe the difference. Carbureted motors are cold-blooded. You're always pumping the bulb. You're always grinding on it or pulling on it to try to get it to start. Cold-blooded creatures. That's definitely not the case with this EFI Suzuki. You hit the start button and it starts instantly. Every single time, doesn't matter if it's warm out or cold out. Easy starting is one of the nice features of this motor. The thing with kicker motors is, of course, you have to change the oil periodically, but most kicker motors don't have an oil filter. Think about that for a second. You've got an oil filter on your truck, you got an oil filter on your V6. How come kicker motors don't come with an oil filter? Well, with Suzuki, they do. The beauty of that is it creates an engine that you're going to get more longevity out of. What we're going to do today is we're going to show you the process. It's really straightforward and simple. First step in changing the oil on any kicker motor is you're going to open up the valve on the top here where you would pour the oil in. What you're doing there is you're breaking the friction or the seal. I'm just going to take that cap and lay it up here so I don't lose it. The next step is to grab yourself a hex wrench like this, put it in the oil drain plug, break it loose, and as you're starting to release this, you're going to have to grab a bucket in order to catch the oil as it drains out. Give it a minute or two for all the oil to pour out of the engine, and then go ahead and take that drain plug, put it back in, and seat it tightly. The next step is you're going to go up to the cap here. This is where the oil filter lives. We're going to pop those 3 screws off, take that cap off, take the oil filter out, discard it, put a new filter in, put the cap back on, and tighten that cap back down. Well, at this point, it's time to put oil back in the motor. This particular 9.9 Suzuki takes just a little bit over a quart. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this synthetic oil here and pour in until this quart is completely in there. And then we'll crack another one, and using the dipstick and checking the dipstick, we'll go real slow until we get just the exact amount of oil inside the engine. The question becomes at the end, what do you do with this drain oil? Well, by all means, do not throw it out. Take it to your local 10-minute oil change facility and donate it. What they'll do is they'll have it recycled and turned into more oil for the future. It's good for the environment and it's good for us sportsmen. Suzuki is all about the environment.
He smacked it, Dad. Oh, that's a nice fish too.
I love it when they come up off the bottom and you get the first look at them.
You can see that jig's in the back of his throat, man. When they want it, man, they want it.
You got that right. You got it right down the old gullet. Nice job.
Yeah, let's pull this fish up and show him off. This is just so much fun. I'm telling you right now, I don't think there's a style of fishing that I like more than pitching jigs. It's just such a fun way. Basically drive around with the boat and graph these fish and find them. Once you find them and cast back to them and you feel that tonk in the line, especially in the springtime, these fish are charged up. They are actively feeding. So if you can find these fish that are actively feeding, it is a ton of fun. That's the reason you come to Ontario, is it's that rod and hand style of fishing, and there are a lot of fish to catch. I want to take a second. I want to talk about how we're fishing these jigs, exactly what we're doing. Now basically what I want to do, I want to make a nice long cast. I want to let that jig hit the bottom. Now one of the things that I do when I am pitching a jig is I kind of let the water temperature dictate my cadence. What I mean by that is that when the water's cold, I'm going to work that jig back to the boat slow. Now if the water's warm, you can get away with more of an aggressive action, maybe trying to get a bite that's just a reactionary type bite. But today what we're dealing with is relatively cold water, 40, 41 degree water. And so what I'm doing is I'm reeling down, putting the rod tip down towards the water, and I'm lifting the rod tip up. Now when I'm lifting it up on tight line, that jig is swinging back towards the boat on a tight line. Once that jig hits the bottom and I can feel that jig hit the bottom, I reel back down, lift up again, and again let that jig swing back towards bottom. Now one of the nice things about a paddle tail style plastic like what we're using today is it has a lot of action. So just by slowly lifting that rod tip up, letting that jig swing to the bottom, and doing that all the way back to the boat, you're getting good action from that paddle tail. And again, let that water temperature dictate how you're working these fish. Warmer water, you can be more aggressive. Colder water, slow it down, and you'll catch a lot of fish.
We have a boat that's pulling in here. It's the first boat we've seen all day. Of course, we got to put on a show right in front of the other boat. I guess that's life in the big city, huh? Thank you, son.
Nice fish, Dad.
There we go. That is a very nice fish. And sometimes I just can't wipe the smile off my face. Jig fishing for walleyes in wilderness situations like this, and man, it is a lot of fun.
Special considerations are provided by Cisco Fishing Systems, your fishing equipment experts. Special considerations are provided by ProCure, ruthlessly effective bait sets.
One thing to keep in mind about spring fishing is that rivers are magnets, literally magnets for walleye. Any place you find a flowing water, it could be in Ontario, northern Ontario where we're now, it could be in the Detroit River in southern Michigan. You're going to find walleyes. Walleyes love flowing water, especially in the springtime. I love that. Oh boy, definitely love that feel. For pitching, I really like plastics that have paddle tails in them. That paddle tail's got just subtle action. It wiggles at the slightest movement, and you can see the fish like them too. It's very common for a walleye to snap off, literally bite the tail right off from the ripple shad. It'll happen 10 or 15 times today to me. It's something very common. But without that little tail there, you don't get the bites. And so the beauty of the ripple shad is that subtle little action in that tail really triggers strikes, particularly on walleyes and cold water environments.
You know, I want to go really in depth on the jig that we're using today to catch these walleye, because this jig right here, it's called the Eagle Eye jig from Eagle Claw, is quickly, and I mean quickly, becoming one of my favorite jigs. We've been using this jig for quite a few years. I like to use it for a lot of different applications, but this jig right here, you know, has a really good paint job. It really stays on really nice. But what makes this jig important to me is, one, it's got a nice long shank hook. Two, it's got what they call their Pro V bend. It's a nice thin wire, and I think that's super important, especially if you're casting a jig or anytime you're using jigs and plastics. And the thing about a nice thin wire is it means that even if you don't get a great hook set, that thin wire, that thin diameter, does a really good job of sticking in there past the barb and still landing a lot of those fish. Now, you got a nice thin wire, got a nice wide gap and a long shank, but then it's also teamed up with a really nice plastic keeper on there. And that's what I really like about this jig, is you slide that piece of plastic up over that little keeper, there's a little barb on there, and that plastic stays stuck. And you can catch a lot of fish on one piece of plastic. You're not constantly taking that plastic and trying to shove it back up to the head of the jig again. So this jig right here, again, it's a 1/4 ounce size Eagle Eye jig from Eagle Claw, and it's just an absolute fish catcher.
He train wrecked it, man. Whew. I love that bite. Definitely love that bite. Whoa, Bubba. What a beautiful fish they are. like Jake was saying earlier, hand and rod fishing is where it's at. It really is a lot of fun to be able to bite and catch these fish. I'll glide him over here for you, Jake.
Nice size fish too, Dad.
Yeah, that one's not bad. It's not bad. Our average has not been terribly big today. A lot of small fish, but certainly a lot of fun ones too. Let's sit down here and take a load off. Boy, give me a boatload of those in a day and I am a happy camper. No question about it. A happy camper.
There's one, Dad. It is so much fun. I don't know how many fish that we've caught today, but it has been a pile of fish, that is for sure. One of the things is that, I've never fished this body of water before. We're in Canada, it's opening day. Talked about the fact that we didn't have a chance to pre-fish. But what we know about walleye is they like flowing water. And so we knew that there was a river that poured in, and we knew if we looked long enough and hard enough, we'd find walleye in this river, and that's exactly what we found. So you take a body of water, never traveled to, never been to before, and no pre-fishing before we shoot the show, and we're still able to shoot and catch a pile of fish and shoot a really good show here. The reason for that is because walleye are walleye are walleye. Wherever they travel, wherever we go, they do exactly the same thing. So if you take these things you learn about walleye, take them all over the country, you're gonna catch a pile of fish. Hey, my name's Jake Romanack, and you've been watching Fishing 4-in-1. We'll see you here, same time, same place, next week. You get a chance, travel up to Ontario, catch a pile of these walleye.
Closed captioning is provided by Precision Trolling Data. Fishing 411 TV is brought to you by Offshore Tackle, Starcraft Marine, Suzuki Marine, J Sporting Goods, Smooth Move Seats, Niagara Falls USA, Eagle Claw, Bill Lewis, and Yakima Bait Company.